All right. And I see folks are still coming in. They're going to be trickling in, y'all. So I'm going to take care of it. But with that being said, if once again, thank each and every one of y'all for joining us tonight. It's an honor and a pleasure as always. Feel free to take care of yourself if you're eating, transitioning from work into the space. Do whatever you need to do. The meeting is being recorded, so if you don't want your name or your face or anything around you being recorded, please just turn off your camera and change your name. It's okay. But with that, as always, my name is Edgar Ernesto Ibarra Gutierrez, but on my camera, it's the MILPA Collective. However, I'm with MILPA. I'm the narrative strategist here at the MILPA Collective. And today's meeting, today's work overview, SBA 23 overview, really comes out of a place of just trying to provide more information, learnings, and for the community, first and foremost. Been a process that's been happening for the last few months here in Santa Cruz County. And from our end, MILPA perspective, is that there needs to be more information, more understanding around the different aspects of SBA 23 Juvenile Justice Realignment. And that's what we wanted to do. So again, thank each and every one of y'all for coming through and sharing space with us this evening. With that, as always, we go this is kind of like our agenda. We'll have a little welcome and overview. That's where I'm in right now. Do SBA 23 history and overview. Then I kind of also look at SB 92, deals more with like the direct files, charging young people as adults and all that stuff in the secure youth track facility. And from there, we're going to be looking at some of the juvenile justice funding, the resources they use, the counties receive to get more information, more resources for young people while they're incarcerated or to prevent them. And then look at kind of like the Santa Cruz County proposal. What's this whole thing? How did we end up here today, understanding that dynamic, but also like what's their pathway moving forward? We'll have a short Q&A and then close it up. Please use the chat function. Y'all, again, I'll stress that once again. Use the chat function. Any questions you have, drop them in there whenever they come. What we'll do if we don't get to them by tonight, we'll circle back up with the document with some answers, or if there's still interest, we can actually circle back and potentially have a part 2 to this conversation. And so that's kind of how we wanted to frame it. With that, again, just overall purpose, y'all. We're inviting the community just to continue learn more about SBA 23, what we can do in the county, what's happening as far as the implementation of this law. We're kind of coming towards the tail end of it, but there's still so much work and things that we could do. The objectives are to understand the intent behind SBA 23, AB 505, SB 92. Learn about engagement opportunities, super important, y'all. Understand resource allocation, and build community engagement and awareness of the implementation of a process. Really important things for us, and we hope that it's important for you as well. And with that, as always, we kind of have a set of disclaimers. We're operating on first draft. What does that mean? Is that a lot of the thoughts and ideas that you may experience yourself here today are probably your first ones. Explore them, approach them in that way. Ask questions, be curious. Very important. We're trying to base what we're doing here today on a set of principles on relationships versus transactions. A lot of the times when we're working in the system, advocating for young people, it's very transactional, just the nature of the system and how it is. However, we do recognize that there's a wealth of experience and expertise in our communities. There's an experience that some people in our communities have had navigating the system, but there's also expertise that's been built throughout the years of grinding, learning, growing together as a community. And we want to be able to leverage that as we gather here today and this evening. And the last part is palabra y plática, y'all. It's about sharing palabra with one another, but also continuing that through ongoing discourse, ongoing conversations, la plática que se sigue, right? That's something that we're always going to encourage. And least but not last, we want to say that for Zoom etiquette, if you forgot for some reason, please turn off your mic. If you're not speaking, just respect the speaker. It's really important. Also, mind where you're taking your camera. Another big part. That's want to make sure we don't get to see nothing crazy. Use the chat function once again for any questions, thoughts that come up really big. And again, the meeting is being recorded, so if you don't want your face, your name on there, change it, turn off your camera. And the last thing is like, hey, we're gathering tonight, this evening, under the principles of respect for respect. If you're here, that means you want to learn something and you want to embark on a learning process with us as a community. There's things that we know, there's things that we don't know, but together we know a little bit, that means we know a whole lot. And so just wanted to say that if you can't uphold that kind of principle of respect for respect, we will ask you to please let yourself out, zoom out, right? Click out, leave the meeting, and if not, I'll personally push the button to kick you out of the meeting. So just wanting to share that in that way. And with that, want to just mention that we today through this conversation we have Laura Rodolfi, who is going to be helping us understand a little bit more about SB 823, the implementation, the history of the law, everything that's been going down regarding this. Laura, is from the W. Hayward Burns Institute, has over 15 years of experience advocating on behalf of young people, has been working at different levels of the state, from the local, state, national, has been able to change policies to reduce racial and ethnic disparities. And the bio's there for then it speaks for itself. But one thing I want to say that Laura has always shown up for the gente, showed up for a lot of people throughout the state in these moments, has always shown a whole abundance of love and what I like to call carnalismo, and that humbleness, that willing to just engage and support community, and that's really respected. So I just want to say thank you, Laura, for walking us through this moment, while helping us understand SB 23. And without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it to you.
Great. Thank you, Edgar. You're making me blush. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all tonight in this virtual space. And what a testament to the commitment you all have to the work in Santa Cruz and doing the right thing for young people, that you're all here on a Tuesday night at 6 o'clock for an hour and a half long Zoom to talk. We're going to get in the weeds a little bit on some of the details of this. So it's really a pleasure to be here with you all. And as Edgar said, please engage with the material with me, ask questions, put them in the chat. I mentioned to him, I have a super ambitious agenda. I have a lot of information I'm trying to go through. So I may answer it later, but I may not. And if not, I'm happy to come back and do this again. I'm happy to meet one-on-one. I'm happy to get into any of the issues that we're going to go over today with more detail. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I'm going to go through a PowerPoint. Okay, does everybody see? No, it's not. Let's see,
It's up, Laura.
It's up, but
yeah.
Is it up? For some reason on my screen, I see, oh, you see the whole, just it says SB 23 and SB 92?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to start by acknowledging the namesake of our organization, the Haywood Burns Institute. This is Haywood Burns himself. And I like to just bring his energy and his spirit into any room, virtual or not, that we're working in, because he stood for such everything that we're here for today. He was, by all accounts, an incredible person. He was an exceptional civil rights advocate, attorney, professor, husband, father, and he was really committed to fighting oppression in the deepest corners of the American experience. And so just want to bring him in and honor his legacy as we talk today about the deepest corners of our justice system and some of California's most vulnerable young people, most of whom are youth of color. So with that, I will say today we're going to, like I said, it's a little ambitious. I'm going to try to go over the history of SB 823 and 92, including sort of where this came from, give an overview of what SB 823 does, give an overview of what the legislation that came right after SB 823 was, which is sort of the tag onto it that dedicates a new kind of secure track for young people, and then talk about other funding sources that are available and sort of other committees that exist at the local level to tap into, to weigh in on and influence the decisions that are being made. Okay, so first things first, we're going to go back to the governor's proposal for closing DJJ. This happened in May of 2020. And there was the proposal to close DJJ. And then when the governor makes a proposal, it was in his budget, right? So this didn't go through a policy decision. This wasn't somebody saying, I want to start legislation and have this as an idea that goes through policy committees and its hearings and stuff. It came through the budget. And it was really a surprise, basically, to most of, I hope, I probably speak for many of you on this phone call, but for me personally, it was a huge surprise. This was not something that any of us really saw coming. And the deadline for passing the budget is June of 2015. So this was a really short timeline for something that's pretty monumental, like closing DJJ. And when we looked at the plan, we sort of said, this is great, but before we said, let's not quite pop the champagne yet for closing this horrific facility that we've all been dying to close for decades, what's the plan? What are we going to do here? How are we going to ensure that we're not just going to be locking young people up closer to their homes in potentially even worse conditions? And so many of us in this Zoom room and beyond put in some really strong advocacy to say, you can't do this quickly. We want you to delay the proposal and not do this right away. So we're not just giving a blank check to probation to, potentially do the same thing closer to home. And this is something, when in just the year prior, Gavin Newsom had proposed successfully to move DJJ, the Youth Prison for Young People, to move DJJ from under CDCR, that a corrections framework, and moved it under HHS, which was a health framework. And the purpose there was really sort of a policy shift, saying we want to treat young people differently. We want to have a health focus. But this proposal that he put into the budget was really fiscally based. And so it had a really different intention. And we said, we need to slow this down and ensure that we're doing this the right way. And so many of us sent lots of letters saying, for many, many reasons, slow your roll. We need to really think about how we're going to do this the right way. And one other sort of point of context is that this all was happening. Remember, this is May of 2020. Something else monumental in this country, May of 2020, was that George Floyd was murdered by police. And suddenly, the media and many politicians had a very sort of amplified voice around racial justice and had a reckoning with racial justice, including Governor Newsom. And, he had a lot of really important quotes at that time about how he wanted to change the way we, and as a state, really thought about structural racism, thought about how we criminalize young people and people of color in this state. And so we said, this is really a moment for us. And one of the things that Gavin Newsom said in his, as he was sort of joining the chorus of saying we need to really be rethinking the way we make policy and ensure that we're looking at race, he said, oftentimes we try to meet the moment with rhetoric. We feign resolve, we make a point to assert a new paradigm, and yet over and over and over and over again, we don't meet that moment. And many of us in the advocacy community said, okay, guess what, Governor Newsom? This is that moment. You can choose to go ahead with this plan and move all of that money straight into the hands of probation and basically pour money into that same system of suppression, custody, and control. Or you can take a minute and develop a plan and think differently about how we want to approach this monumental change for the state of California. So as many of you know, we were successful in getting that delay, right? They said, okay, we're not going to close it immediately. It's not going to happen immediately. There's a little bit of time. And so a lot of us met regularly and often. I mean, we're talking like daily, to set some principles about what we thought we wanted this to look like. And it was a campaign that we said we called the campaign "Close DJJ the Right Way." And really, we said, yes, this is something that we have been wanting for years and years and years, but really only if you do it with a set of guiding principles that honor what we want to see for young people moving forward. So you can see here, a lot of this was, again, many of you in this room were part of this, but it was convened in part with the CAYCJ, the California Alliance for Youth and Community Justice, where we started meeting, regularly and developing these principles for what we wanted to see in a new way forward with the closure of DJJ. And a lot of that had to do with, we sort of summed up all of those guiding principles into some things that we wanted to see. We wanted to see oversight. We wanted to see strict eligibility and transfer safeguards for sending young people to adult court. We wanted to think about what would the place look like that a young person could potentially go to and what the programming in those facilities would look like. We wanted to really think about funding, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how that's changing again now. But how does the funding work? Who's making the decisions? How much money are they getting? And how does that happen? And we wanted to think more about that timeline, having a longer timeline for the closure. And the short of the long there is that we were successful, not only in delaying this process, but in really getting almost all of those core principles that we said this is what we want as the community. This is what we want to see when we close DJJ. We were successful in getting many of those things into place. So one thing we got was some really powerful intent language. And this is important because it's used in litigation. I know defenders are using it when they're talking about what's happening in the system, but it's setting the stage and it's setting the context for what we as a state want for young people in light of this giant change that's happening. And I'm going to just read this out because the principles in here are pretty profound. And there are things that we should continue to go back to and to rely on when I'm going to go through some of the meetings that are happening in your county and others that are around SB 823. But these are things that we have to continually go back to and continually remind our stakeholder partners that this is why we're doing this. This is the reason why this is a whole intent behind the bill that closes DJJ SB 823. So this is one of several of the components of the intent language. There's more that are equally powerful, but this is one that has an important summary. It is the intent of the legislature and the administration for counties to use evidence-based and promising practices and programs that improve outcomes of youth of color and public safety, that reduce the transfer of youth into the adult criminal justice system, that ensure that dispositions are in the least restrictive appropriate setting, reduce and then eliminate racial and ethnic disparities, and reduce the use of confinement in juvenile justice system by using community-based responses and interventions. Wow, that's the law. That's the first thing we read when we get into SB 823, okay? This is what we want to see. And so it's important that we really think about that and ground ourselves in that intent as we think about, going into some of the meetings we're going to talk a little bit more about and advocating for young people. This isn't fringe here, people. This is the foundation of the law that is part of SB 823. Okay, so that's the intent language. And then, like I said, most of the other components that we said it's really important that we include these in the law were also part of the law. So, the intake closure date happened back in July of 2021, and of course now DJJ is just totally closed. There was a lot of protections against ensuring adult court transfer by extending the age at which a young person can be held in a local facility. There was a number of things around the funding and planning, such that the money that comes from the state to the counties does not just go right into the pockets of probation. It's decided by a very diverse stakeholder group that we're going to talk a lot more about. And there's oversight. I mean, one of the things that we said was we need oversight for ensuring that that we don't just let the probation sort of police themselves on this. We asked for data to say we actually need to be monitoring and measuring who's impacted by this big change and how. And then finally in SB 823, there was this intent for language that was going to go into more detail around the secure youth treatment facilities, or what we called at the time the secure track. So that is legislation that happened a little bit later in what's called SB 92. So I'm going to go through a few of the components of SB 823 that are most relevant to the advocacy work that you all are going to be doing. And the first one is, the OICR, the Office of Youth and Community Restoration. Again, I can't underscore enough just how important it is that we have this office now. Before OICR was established, there was no state agency that oversaw the care and custody of young people in the justice system. So, there were things you could do at the local level, but there was no one at the state level that was offering technical assistance, offering oversight in any way, putting out any information for folks about how we follow the law and care for young people in our community. And so this is a really big deal. And I think one of the, I'm going to read this out loud too, because this is another office that we need to really tap into and advocate that it stands up to its bold mission. And its bold mission is this: to promote trauma-responsive, culturally informed services for youth involved in the juvenile justice system that support the youth's successful transition into adulthood and help them become responsible, thriving, and engaged members of the community. So a really big charge, and they have a big budget, their staff is really growing, but their role is really important in ensuring that things run smoothly at the local level, and they're a resource for us all to tap into to ensure that SB 823 is really being implemented with fidelity. So a couple things that OICR does. It reports on youth outcomes of the justice system. It identifies policy recommendations for how to improve programming for young people. It identifies and disseminates best practice on things that counties should be doing. And it provides technical assistance, and this is their words, not mine, but provides technical assistance that are required to expand diversion opportunities and the like. And the reason that one is really important is that sometimes when we think of OICR, we think of it as an agency that is really there to help with SB 823 implementation, meaning it's an agency that's there to help with counties that now have young people that they didn't have before because they aren't going to DJJ anymore. But really, their work spans the entire youth justice spectrum. They are there to ensure that we are using diversion opportunities every chance we can, and to put out sort of reducing the role of the justice system for young people writ large, not just for those young people at the deep end. And then finally, they developed an Office of the Ombudsperson, which is also really important and something that everyone needs to know a lot about. And that is that before this, we never had an agency at the state level that a young person or family could go to say, hey, things are not right in juvenile hall. Things are not right with my young person who's involved in the justice system. And to have someone who's actually looking at that and following up and investigating on what's happening. And so the Ombuds Office now does that. The Ombuds Office up at OICR has a role in ensuring that young people's rights are protected at the local level. And so I can put in the chat after too a lot of information brochures on how to contact them. And every juvenile hall has a listing of the Youth Bill of Rights, and with that is included how to contact the Ombuds Office. And I'll say also, one of the things that in AB 505, and I'll talk a little bit more about AB 505 later, but this other bill that sort of enhanced some of the things that we needed to see with the passing of the bill that closed DJJ, SB 23. One of the things that it did was it protected young people a little bit more through the Ombuds Office. So originally, when SB 823 passed, it said that the ombudsperson can go into any facility to protect young people's rights as long as it gives the administrator of that facility 48 hours notice. Okay, when a young person is in crisis and calling and you're a parent and you say, we need somebody in there now, you don't want them to say, okay, well, let me give 48 hours notice for them to clean up the mess, and then I'll go in and see what's going on. No, you want to have somebody who's able to go in there and investigate immediately. So AB 505 is a bill that passed in 2023. And that bill was really making sure that the Ombuds Office had a little bit more teeth, that it could get into facilities at any time without notice, and that it could actually access case files and look at what was happening with young people without that 48-hour notice as well. I'm gonna shift to talking about the JJRBG funding, all the money, but I go fast and I talk fast, and I know that about myself. So I want to stop for a second and just see, I can't see the chat, but Edgar, I want to see if there's any questions in the chat, or pause for a second to see if folks have any questions about what we've talked about so far.
No questions yet. No questions yet on the chat, but if someone has one or two people have a question, feel free. This will be a good time.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation thus far. I did have a question around OICR and
Yep.
how you mentioned they actually have an extended opportunity to kind of cover a lot of different institutions in regards to juvenile justice.
Yep.
Does that include opportunities within school districts?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
This is just for their inspection is only of juvenile facilities, and they're required actually to go to juvenile facilities once a year. But they're not to SYTFs once a year, but they don't have a duty in schools. They can investigate other issues related to the justice system, but their role is limited to the justice system. Okay. Feel free to, keep, oh, please feel free.
One more person. I think we have Jeffrey.
Yeah, hey everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Jeffrey Mata over here. Yeah, I have a question regarding the the office of the ombuds. So I know what an ombudsperson is, right? I just literally spoke to my university's ombudsman today.
Mhm.
But to everyone in attendance, would you mind like giving in like an overview of like what the duties and responsibilities of an ombudsman is, and
Yeah.
like benefits and like the benefits of having an ombudsman?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So, generally speaking, and there's ombuds people, like you said, in all sorts of different contexts, in nursing homes, in various different contexts. There's ombuds persons, and really their role is to be a sort of third party neutral person that resolves complaints and investigates complaints that happen within within an institution. So their role is really to be that body that is making sure that if somebody calls and says, hey, I'm not getting, we're not getting we're not getting dinner, or we're too cold in our room, or the staff in this facility are not treating us with respect, or, it's abusive. Their role is to get in there and find out what's happening, to investigate it. And if they don't resolve it, to forward it to the appropriate agency to investigate it further. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about the money. Okay, so like I said, this was a really big success for SB 823. When it was originally conceived of, it was going to be $250 million that just went from the state straight into the hands of probation. And that is not what happens. And that is not what happens. So in order to be eligible for the money, for this money, this pot of money, which is called the Juvenile Justice Realignment Block Grant, in order to be eligible for the money, you have to create a subcommittee of your Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council. And that committee has to include probation, the district attorney, the public defender, Department of Social Service, school districts or the county office of education, a court representative, and when for us, no fewer than 3 community members. And in the legislation, it even specifies that those community members, should be folks who have system experience or are system impacted, to give that voice. So those people, that constellation of people, has to be convened, and their role is to develop a plan for what the county is going to do now that DJJ is closed. That's really their charge, is to come up with a plan for what they're going to do, what are they going to do now with the closure of DJJ. They have to then send that plan over to the Office of Youth and Community Restoration, that office we just talked a lot about, by May 1st of every year. And then OYCR checks that plan to make sure that it has all the elements that it says it needs, and I can go through a little bit more of some of those, the elements that the plan has to describe the population you're going to serve. It has to describe the facilities you're going to use to serve those young people. You have to describe how the money that comes to you is going to address mental health, support programming, support family engagement in programming, use evidence-based services and practices, and give a detailed plan of what you're going to do as a county to work with young people. Okay, so that's what the plan has to include. And it's detailed and specified in the law. But if OYCR gets your plan and it doesn't include all those sort of line items, then it sends it back to the county and it says, finish those things. Now, one thing that we tried to do with AB 505 is we tried to say, your money should be withheld if you don't do those things. And the reason for that is it is a very low bar. It is a very low bar, okay? Your plan has to describe the things you're going to do. You don't have to prove you're doing it. You don't have to you don't have to use a certain amount of money for certain things. You just have to describe it. And we said, wouldn't it be something if we had to ensure that counties actually followed the law and did these things and had a thoughtful plan to care for our young people before they got their money? And it sounded like good governance from our perspective, and our organization was a co-sponsor of AB 505, but counties did not like that at all. The CSAC did not like that at all. They said, no way, we want that money, no strings attached, absolutely not. So In AB 505, even though that was part of what we originally had in the bill to say, you got to show us what you did, you got to show us that you followed the law in order to get the money. That doesn't happen anymore. But still, OICR does send it back to counties to say, hey, revise this. They still get their money, but they do revise it. There's nothing that would really require them not to. They'd still get their money, but to date, according to OICR, counties have done that. They've been good partners, and they've filled out their reports and filled out all the details that are required by law. So then on July 1st of every year, the money and I'm going to talk about what the formula is, but the state releases the money from the Juvenile Justice Realignment Block Grant to the counties. And then the board, it doesn't go to probation, remember, it goes to the county board of supervisors. It goes to the county. And the law says that the county board of supervisors must consider that plan, must consider the plan that was developed by that subcommittee when it's making its allocations in the county. Okay, so this is really the structure for how those monies for the JJRBG are allocated. And I'm going to pause for a minute because this is a place, and I'll say one other thing about this, and I'm going to pause. But this meeting is an important one to attend because a lot of this is where the plan is developed. It's Brown Act, which means that it is required to be open to the public, and it's required that you are given an opportunity for public comment. So these are great meetings to go to voice your opinion, to go back to that intent language of SB 823 and say, wait a minute, is what we're doing really, following the intent of SB 823? How are we allocating our resources in a way that's going to actually promote youth development in a healthy way? What are we doing to reduce and eliminate racial and ethnic disparities? So it's a great opportunity, these meetings, to, even if you're not officially on the committee, to voice your opinion. And I actually said I was going to pause for questions, but I'm going to get through a couple more slides on the JJRBG and how much money you get and all that business. And then we'll come back to this if we have any other questions. Okay, so the next thing I want to just mention is what the funding formula looks like. And at the end of this presentation, if we hopefully have time, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that is something that's in process of revision right now. And Carlos from MILPA I see is on here, and he's been working with me and several other folks on proposing a really radically different approach to what the funding formula looks like. But the funding formula is up for conversation right now, and also something to weigh in on. But the existing funding formula that decides how much money every county is going to get is based on this pie chart you see. 20% is based on the number of young people in your population. 30% is based on the number of young people that you as a county incarcerated at DJJ. And the reason that that's part of it is that they're basically saying, well, if you incarcerated a lot of young people, then you probably needed that money at the local level, because now those young people are going to be, you're no longer going to be sending them out. It's part of the most controversial part that we really want to change about the formula. And then the third is 50% of the money is dedicated to the number of young people who are adjudicated, who go through the court system, and the allegations against them are found true by a judge. 50% are based on young people who go through the justice system, and the judge says this young person has committed a serious violent felony. And it's a laundry list of offenses that are included within that. And that's the one that is most, I think, important here, because when we look at the language of SB 823, the quote unquote target population that we're serving are young people who were otherwise eligible for DJJ prior to its closure. And that's who these kids are. Young people who have committed an offense that are listed in a part of the law called the Welfare and Institutions Code, section 707B. And again, it's a really long list of offenses, but those are young people who used to be eligible to go to DJJ. And so this is basically saying we want to give more money to counties that have a large number of young people who've been adjudicated of those more serious offenses. And then a little bit on the focus of the funding. This is another part of the intent language that's really important. And it says that counties will receive funding to meet the needs of youth by providing and implementing public health approaches to support positive youth development, building the capacity of a continuum of community-based approaches, and reducing crime by youth. So again, in those meetings, when we go and we say, okay, well, how much money do we have? How are we going to spend it? This is a really important part of the intent language to go lean on against and to say, well, how are we spending this money in a way that is promoting positive youth development, that is ensuring that we're investing in a continuum of community-based responses. And then again, just reminding that the quote unquote target population for who this money is supposed to be spent on by a county are young people who were previously eligible to go to DJJ. Okay, this next one is like deep, 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 deep in the weeds. Okay, and I'm only going to show you this because I have an advocacy suggestion on this one for you all. This is the math behind the JJRBG, and it is really boring. I spend a lot of time with these, but it's boring, but I'm going to show you why this is important for you guys to know. Okay, so remember I said there's three things in that pie chart. There's the average daily population at DJJ. There's the youth accused of adjudicated for serious offenses, and the youth population. Two of those things are basically static, right? Because the DJJ population, it's based on 3 different snapshots at DJJ. And the youth population, it fluctuates a little bit over time, but it's pretty consistent too. So the thing that really sort of changes the dynamic factor here are the number of young people who are adjudicated for these serious offenses. But it's the thing that as a county gets you the most money, okay? Because it's 50% of the total allocation for the state. So, okay, this is the boring part, but bear with me for a second. The first step in sort of getting to the end, like how much money you're going to get as a county, is you determine the number of youth impacted for each of those 3 things. So if we're looking at youth adjudicated for serious violent and serious felonies, that number in Santa Cruz County, according to the Department of Finance, for 21-22, the fiscal year 21-22, was 13. There were 13 young people adjudicated for these serious offenses. Then you take that number for your county and you divide it by all the young people in the whole state who were adjudicated for serious offenses, which is over 10,000, and you get 0.13, which means that Santa Cruz County accounts for 0.13% of all the kids in the state that were adjudicated of these really serious offenses. And then because it's 50% of the total allocation, then you take that 0.13 and you multiply it times 50%, so 0.065, and that gives us a sense of how much the proportion of the total fund that Santa Cruz County gets because of the number of young people who are adjudicated for these serious offenses. And you do that same step 1, step 2, step 3 for the DJJ population, and you get a number, and it's all listed there. For the youth population, and you get a number, and it's listed there. And then you add it all together, and you get the proportion of the total funds that you as a county are going to receive. So if you just look at that top line here, if you're can you see my cursor? Okay. So if you look at this top line here, you would be getting, in Santa Cruz County, there were 7 youth at DJJ of a total of 688. So that's 1% of all kids at DJJ. And if we multiply that then by the 30%, that's 0.31%. We add all of those together and we determine that Santa Cruz County is going to get 0.5% of all the money that's available for realignment. And in 2021-22, that total amount of money was about $40 million. If we do that math, Santa Cruz County would get $197,000 for that year. The law says if you are a county that was going to get less than $250,000 based on this formula, we're going to bump you up. We're going to bump you up to $250,000. So Santa Cruz County was bumped up to $250,000. Now, for the other years, same math. You do the same math for every year to figure out what your allocation is going to be, and it's a comparison of what's happening in your county with what's happening in the rest of the counties, and then it's weighted based on that pie chart that I showed you. The reason that I'm showing this to you and going down this deep rabbit hole of math on a Tuesday night when you could be having dinner with your family is because look at what's inside the circle. Okay, this is not math that I came up with. This is math that came to me from the Department of Finance. According to their information that they got from the county, there are no young people who were adjudicated of serious violent felonies in fiscal year 22-23, fiscal year 23-24, or fiscal year 24-25, meaning the county has really lost out on some money, okay? And this is something that I think we need to just talk about, think about, make sure, I've alerted, I talked briefly with Fernando Giraldo, the chief of probation, and just said, I've just been investigating this and I'm not sure what's happened. And so I want to let him know too, and we can, have future conversations, because I don't know that they even know about this, because this is not on a website somewhere. You have to request the information and then dig into it. And I've just gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole on it recently, which is why I have it here. But this is important for us because we want more money for this, right? Like if we look back at the intent of where this money is supposed to go, we want more money. And if we're not getting as much money as we should as a county, then we need to rectify that. Okay, so thank you for indulging that. Now this was on that last table, but it's a little easier to see when it's not that teeny tiny font. This is the money that so far Santa Cruz County has received through the JJRBG. So, again, that first year it was supposed to be less than the minimum. So you got 250,000. The next year you got 500,000. The year after that, 850,000. And the year after that, 880,000. But there's reason to believe that either this whole proposal to set up a new secure youth treatment facility in the county or a camp in the county is totally, unnecessary, because there just aren't any young people who've been accused of any of these offenses, which would be great, but not happening. Or you're losing out on money, and those bar charts should be a lot higher. I'm going to talk for a second a little bit about AB 505 and how that has changed this process. Do you want me to do that? Why don't I do that quickly, and then we'll go into any questions. So AB 505, that bill that I mentioned that we tried to say, like, hey, counties should have to show that they're meeting the law before they get their money. We were not successful in. We weren't successful with a lot of things in AB 505. And really, it was sort of focused on democratizing how the Juvenile Justice Realignment Block Grant money works in the following ways. So first of all, it said, no longer does the chief have to be the chair of that committee. The chief could be a co-chair, right? So we sort of demoted the chief by saying, actually, you could share that position. And several counties have done that. They have shared the chairing position of that committee with a community partner. So that's something to really think about. I'm not sure what it is in Santa Cruz. And there was a new requirement that said that that plan that the county is creating has to be developed, quote unquote, with review and participation of the subcommittee community members, and specifically naming those community members, because what we were seeing is that in a lot of counties, yeah, they named community members, but they didn't ever ask opinion. They never, weighed in. And so we said, that's actually not the way this is. The intent of this was to say, there's real voice and urgency, and there's an important voice that we want to see reflected in this plan. So figure out how to incorporate that. So that's something that has to be shown in the plan. It's sort of, and here it says, no more professionals know best. Like, we want to hear from the community on what we should be doing. The plan has to be approved by a majority of the subcommittee, because it also used to be that you didn't even have to vote on the plan. You just develop a plan, and sometimes in counties it would be sort of written by probation, and people would say, but I don't like this part, I don't like this part, I don't like this part. And it was still sent in and approved, and that was the plan. And so now it has to be approved by a majority of that committee that we talked about. They have to be submitted annually to the OICR by a different date. And then this is a really important one too. It used to be that that committee that I talked about had to meet once every 3 years. Well, I mean, if you think about like needing to adjust for things and change and make modifications to ensure that your plan is reflective of what you need in your community, you need to meet a little bit more often. So now, under the law, that subcommittee has to meet at least twice a year. Most counties meet more often than that. And then the plan has to include a description of the progress that you've made in what you said you were going to do. And this is one that people sort of got their pants in a bundle about a little bit. It's not asking you to prove anything, but it is saying, can you as a county reflect back on what you said you were going to do and whether you did it? Are you making progress? And again, I think it's an important part of ensuring that we're really meeting the intent of SB 23 and serving young people in the right way. Okay, now I am going to pause for questions, because that whole section around this committee and the money is a lot. So I'll pause to see if we have any questions here.
Let's start with I know Stephanie mentioned something around, we want more money, yes, but we would not want but we would not want it on the backs of mislabeling our youth as violent offenders. I think I'm missing something. And I think that is in regards to the chart where you showed that Santa Cruz County has not been labeling or identifying that it has arrested young people with those serious crimes. I think the comment was toward that. And Stephanie, feel free to unmute yourself and ask as well.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the response in the chat. And I think maybe it was the bar graph after this where I missed that they are already being labeled. We're just not receiving funding for it. So thank you for
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it would be, I mean, it would be great if there were no young people who were coming into the justice system for serious offenses. This is something it's just based on a penal code section of law violations. But according to what they're sending into the state, there are no young people, which would be celebrated if we thought it was true. But we have reason to believe that that is not actually the case based on some of the data we've seen from the county.
And Laura,
And
this is youth adjudicated for
Yep.
violent and serious felony, right? So the court has already found that the charges are true.
Yep.
So it's beyond the labeling. It's the adjudicated part.
and
Yep. Thank you, Raquel.
and Daniel had a question, and then we'll go to Jeffrey. Said Daniel asked earlier, has there been an occasion where a county submits a plan, meets all elements / requirements, and still got denied? Which I don't think so, but
No, and again, remember, hi Daniel, by the way, it's good to see you here.
Hey Laura, yes, it's good to see you too.
No, I mean, and it's because there's no ability to withhold the funds. You know, we thought it would be kind of good to have a carrot stick approach to say, like, show up a little bit for this. This is a really big deal. This is a big part of the law. There have definitely been counties that have sent in plans that OYCR has said, hey, you've missed a few points, go back and revise
Got
this.
it.
They've done it, but there's no ability to withhold funds based on that.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions about JJ?
Jeffrey,
Yep.
Jeffrey has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, if we can go back to the previous slide,
Yes. This one?
not the previous one before that one.
Yes. The really in
Yes.
the weeds one.
Yes, I don't know if you're able to remove that data from SEC reveals. There you go.
Yep.
So I see all these zeros, right? I'm not really understanding the data to be honest, because on the right side where it says amount from SEO, right? It says the amount continues to increase. So there's continuous funding. But then the numbers, I'm not understanding the zeros. If we're still getting funding, but the numbers don't represent the funding. So I'm kind of having trouble understanding that data.
Yep.
And then also the fact that, this all it takes is a subcommittee to build, right, a plan or whatever, and then there's no really contingency plan to really hold to really hold them accountable or to ensure that they are using evidence-based practices or whatnot. It's just
Yeah. Well, let me do,
I don't know
two
but
really,
it just
really good questions.
type
Two
in
really good questions. So the first one is, yes, this is like so deep in the weeds. So let me just explain how the math works. The first thing to know is that do you see this column here, these numbers here, 40 million, 118 million, 192 million, and 208 million? That's the total amount of money that the state is giving out total to every county divided up through the counties each year. So it increased as counties became more responsible for young people that were no longer at DJJ, because it was, DJJ was open at the beginning of this and young people were still there. And now it's a total realignment. No young people are at DJJ. So there's more money invested. So the percent that Santa Cruz is getting, that first year, it was 0.5% of 40 million. But this most recent year, it was 0.42%, a lesser percentage of a much bigger pot of money, right? So even though it's a smaller proportion of the total, because the total grew so much, Santa Cruz County got more money. Every county got more money because the total pot available is higher. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Now it makes more sense. Thank you.
You bet.
Laura, we have one or two more questions. However, I don't know if you want to wait a little bit longer and get through more of the slides or
Sure. And I also wanted to respond to that other question, which is, what do we do about this? Because, we'll get into a little bit more, but the thing you can do are two meetings that really you have a voice at. One is that JJCC subcommittee meeting where the plan is being developed, and to weigh in and say, I don't like that plan. I don't like the way we're spending the money. I want to weigh in differently. And even talking to your community partners about who are voting members about how they're voting and what they're talking about with those plans, but using your voice during public comment to make that known. And the second is doing the same thing with your board of supervisors, with your elected officials. Remember, they are charged with allocating money and considering the plan when they do that. Okay, so they're supposed to be, when they're giving out money, all that money that comes to the county, they're supposed to be basing it on their plan. So if you're finding out that they're not, or finding out that you don't know where the money's going and want to know more about it, the Board of Supervisors is another place to go, probably the Public Protection Committee, to learn more about how those decisions are being made. What are they using and to consider that plan? How are they doing that? Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is this intent language. Okay, so remember, SB 823 is the bill we mostly talk about with closing DJJ because it really did the heavy lift. It did most of the work. But remember, in SB 823, there was a tagline that basically said, we have an intent to figure out what's going to happen at the local level with this quote unquote secure track. And so SB 92 is the bill that does that. I want to talk for a little bit about why we as justice stakeholders, many of whom are abolitionists, even had a conversation about this, because what we were doing with this was sort of creating a new system of incarceration for young people at the local level, which none of us want. So why on earth would we even talk about it? Well, let's remind ourselves of the youth justice flow. So when a young person is arrested and they get referred to probation, the probation department, can decide to forward it on to the district attorney, who might file a petition in court. The young person goes to court when and there's a disposition for the case. When a young person goes through that court process and is adjudicated for one of those serious offenses that we were just talking about, a 707B offense, there's a whole host of things that the judge can do. The judge can get rid of the case. The judge can send the young person home and they can be on probation. The young person can go to a private placement. The judge can send that young person to a camp. Or before SB 823, the judge could send that young person to DJJ, the sort of deepest end of the system, send that kid out to the state, which is a really big deal. So the other thing that we have to be mindful of is this other process that can happen. A young person can also be transferred to adult court. So how that happens is when a young person is accused of an offense, the district attorney can decide, if it's listed in that same penal code section, the welfare and institution code section I talked about, 707B, that lists a number of serious offenses, they can say, and actually it's any felony offense with some changes in law, but any serious offense, they can say, instead of filing your case in juvenile court, I want to file your case in adult court. So they file a motion that says, I move to transfer this case from juvenile court to adult court. And when they do that, then probation has to write up a report about what they see for that young person and whether they think that's a good or bad idea. And they make a recommendation to the court about whether they think that you should stay in the youth justice system or be transferred to the adult system. And then the defense and prosecution, meet about that and talk about it. And oftentimes, prior to closure of DJJ, there was a stipulated agreement, a sort of plea agreement that basically said, okay, I will withdraw my motion to file Laura's case in adult court if you agree that she will go to DJJ till she's 25. And that often was the case. We don't have data on it, but we know, talking to defenders and prosecutors and judges, that this happened a lot, that there would be a number of kids that went to DJJ went there as a sort of withdrawal of a transfer motion. And then if there wasn't a withdrawal of a transfer motion, then there would be a transfer hearing. And sometimes the young person remained in juvenile court. Sometimes they were transferred to adult court. And often when they stayed in juvenile court for those more serious offenses, that young person might have gone to DJJ anyway. So when we take DJJ off the table, when we're closing DJJ, many of us were very worried that if we do that, we are going to dramatically increase the number of young people who are going to be sent to adult court. And that means going to adult prison for a very long time. And that is a huge threat. And the only thing worse we can do to a young person in the youth justice system than send them to DJJ is send them to the adult criminal justice system. So that was a real and legitimate threat, okay? And so we worked to develop what we called the secure track, which establishes these new facilities called secure youth treatment facilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that whole bill, the bill SB 92 that does all of these things. But I first want to just sort of share with folks at the state level why that concern was so real, okay? So this is data that shows on the top line in yellow, the number of young people who were prosecuted as adults over time in the state of California. And if you look at that line, you can see it really dropped dramatically. As a state, we just have not been prosecuting young people as adults as much, which is great, right? That bottom line at the bottom, that blue line, is the number of young people committed to DJJ every year. What you see after 2016 and after, so there was a proposition that passed that said no longer can a district attorney just unilaterally decide that they're going to send a young person to adult court. There has to be a hearing where the judge decides. A number of protections in the law that limited who we could send to adult court. We saw reliance on DJJ, incarcerating young people at DJJ, increase. And so you can see there that that threat that I just mentioned, that whole idea of like, why would we build a secure track? Why would we build an avenue to incarcerate young people differently than we did at DJJ? Just knock down DJJ and be done with it. Like, that's it. The reason that there was even consideration of a new bill to create something is because of this threat of adult court prosecution. Okay. So sort of the rationale, behind why we needed a secure track, we were hearing from sort of everyone, public defenders, judges, prosecutors, consistent feedback that, their existing county level alternatives to DJJ weren't seen as viable to adult prison, and that we were going to see more youth going to adult court. So judges really said, young people needed to be held more accountable. Prosecutors were saying public safety requires this. Defenders were saying that if they didn't have something that they could sort of offer up as a quote unquote, and this is a real quote from a defender, as something that feels more scary than what's available, then they're going to all go to adult court. So again, just giving sort of a justification of why on earth was there legislation that we as a community worked on to develop this quote unquote secure track. That's why. So SB 92 is the bill that sort of tries to balance out this idea of having something that will limit the number of young people prosecuted as adults. And the SB 92, it triggers a baseline time, so sort of a certain amount of time that a young person has to spend in the facility, but it includes a whole bunch of protections. And I'm not going to go through all of these because we don't have time today. We could do it another time. But I'm going to talk briefly about a few of them. The baseline time and what that is, individualized rehabilitation plans, because this is also something that we need to be advocating hard to ensure that we have the right kind of plan for young people. Every young person committed to an SYTF gets one. That young people have review hearings, and there's this thing called a less restrictive program that is probably one of the most important parts of SB 823/92 with this whole thing. So, okay, the first thing around baseline time. So with SB 92, young people have a baseline time that's associated with their adjudication. And there's court rules that dictate how long a young person stays. It used to be when a young person went to DJJ, there were parole consideration dates, and they were much longer than what the baseline confinement time is. But now what judges do is they consider a range of time based on the offense for how long a young person will be committed to the secure youth treatment facility for. There's a minimum and there's a maximum term. And we're not going to go into the weeds of all of that today, but what I think is most important is to remember, and we're going to talk more about why in a second, the baseline time that's associated with your commitment to the secure youth treatment facility doesn't actually have to be spent in the secure youth treatment facility. Your time could be spent at home, if that's the less restrictive program that has been established for you. So we're going to talk about what the less restrictive programs are, but the key thing here is, it's a big deal to be committed to an SYTF because it comes with a minimum time that is, that's a lot. It could be a long time. It could be 4 years, but that time doesn't have to be spent in the facility. Okay. So other key components of SB 92 to be aware of, one is the individualized rehabilitation plan. this is a key thing that's everything about the young person's experience being committed to the secure youth treatment facility is supposed to be in a plan that identifies the young person's needs, that talks about the programming the young person needs, that reflects and is consistent with the principles that are trauma informed, evidence-based, and culturally responsive care. And most importantly, it's a plan that is supposed to be developed with input from the young person and their family. And it's a plan. So this plan is something that we've learned from a lot of counties is not really being treated with as much gravity as it should be. So it's something to investigate too. But this plan is what's in place to help determine what happens to a young person at a secure youth treatment facility. Really important that every 6 months, when a young person is committed to a facility, there's a progress review hearing whereby the judge can say, okay, well, you know, you had your baseline time, but you are doing so well, I'm shaving off 6 months. Every 6 months, when you go to court, the judge can shave off another 6 months of your baseline time. And it's a great time for the court to make a recommendation about the last part of the bill that I think is really most important, and that is to be stepped down to a less restrictive program. So the young person or their attorney can make a motion to the court that says, we think that Laura should be transferred from the secure youth treatment facility to a less restrictive program to serve the remainder of their baseline time. And the less restrictive program could be anything, okay? So in the language of the law, it says that a less restrictive program could be something such as a halfway house, a camper ranch, or, and this is important and bold, a community residential or non-residential service program, meaning this is something that could actually be a young person at home getting supportive services. So the key thing here is that really, if we think about the continuum of the justice system from, a secure youth treatment facility, that you can go to any, and you don't have to step from one to the next. You really could be transferred to any of these less restrictive places, including being home, which is something I know that when we've talked to your chief in Santa Cruz County, they're talking about really wanting to prioritize around giving young people supportive services at home to keep them on track, which is again why the proposal that we saw was so surprising. Okay, so the next thing I was going to do is shift into other state funding sources. Do we have any questions about SB 92 before I do that?
There was a few remarks, Jeffrey. I know before Jimmy Cook mentioned another comment about the data. Has mentioned the key to that funding is adjudication, which means it has been decided what is proven true.
Yep.
Until that happens, no funding would apply to that use case. And since these are the most serious offenses like murder, these cases take 2 years or longer to adjudicate. So the act may have taken place in 2022, but has yet to adjudicate. Also, currently there are 2 youth in the highest level of long-term detention, SYTF. And then Jeffrey has his hand up too.
Okay, great.
Hi, yes, thank you. I mean, this sounds good. And I like how the wording was changed instead of 6 month parole hearing, right? It's progress hearing. I really like the change in terminology because language does matter. But once you know you cannot know it. So, there's still that possibility that um, you could get denied, right? Like, hey, you come back in 6 months. And the possibility also that you may not get anything deducted away, you just showing up just to show up. Right from this is
Yeah.
from previous experience. Um, it sounds like this could be where a court sentence a youth to, hey, this is as part of your term, right, or your conditions and whatnot. You have to complete, let's say, for example, hypothetical, right, as part of your terms and conditions, a joven noble curriculum, or a youth program that provided by MILPA, right?
Yep.
And we would have some sort of say, or right, as advocates on behalf of the youth. Um, yeah, that's my input.
Yep. Yep, I think that's a great point, and that's exactly what we want to try to be seeing. And to your point about those 6-month review hearings, you know, there was a bad case that recently, it's called Tony R. And it was litigation that basically there was a county that just wasn't shaving off any time. And the public defender filed and said, hey, you have to consider this. It says it in the law. And the appellate court said, actually, you don't have to. There's not a requirement that you do that to reduce time. So many of us are thinking about ways in which we can have another round of legislation that clarifies that actually, yes, when a young person is programming well and doing well, like it's a great opportunity to incentivize, doing well by shaving off time. And so offering more guidelines for the court in what it means at those progress review hearings to give less time. Okay, so the next thing I was going to just talk quickly about is all the different state funding sources. So there's the Juvenile Justice Realignment Block Grant, which we went through, and I'm going to talk about the revisions that Carlos and many others and I are working on right now. There's the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act money. There's Youth Offender Block Grant money. There's juvenile reentry money. There's a little pot of money that came from a bill that passed right after SB 823 for counties to collect data on SB 823. And then there's this thing called the Juvenile Camps and Ranch Fund. So, and then I also, in addition to the money that comes out, there is all these committees, that meet to decide various different things at the county level. And I sort of call it the alphabet soup of youth justice because they all basically sound the same and they all have sort of related charges, but not totally. I don't think we have a ton of time to go through all of this today, but I'm going to leave this for you as a resource and just do high level on this one. But there's the JJCC, the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, and that is a body that comes together to develop what they call a comprehensive multi-agency plan for figuring out what you're going to do with resources that come from the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act. And really, these money were always intended to go to community to prevent young people from entering the justice system. It was a bill that was passed by Cardenas and Schiff, who are now in the federal legislature. And, when we did some investigation about how those monies were being spent at the county level, it turned out that most of the money was going to probation staff. And we have, through various iterations, been trying to change the requirements for the JJCPA to make sure that the money is directed to community, that it can't be held by probation. And when we did that, we reached out to Schiff and Cardenas, who, wrote the original legislation, and they said, that is not what we wanted. This money was never intended to go to probation, and wrote, support letters to say, let's change that. But so that's the JJCPA, is money that is really intended to prevent justice system involvement. There's the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, which we've just talked, subcommittee for the JJRBG, the Juvenile Justice Realignment Block Grant money that we talked about. That meets twice a year to decide on the plan for youth justice. And this is another great place to go to weigh in on what's happening at the local level with your SB 823 plan. And then there's the Juvenile Justice Commission, which is a different body that's really required, that really is about looking at what's happening in facilities and doing some more oversight at the local level about what's happening with young people. And I listed out here, it's too small to see, but you can have it as a resource, the required composition of the different committees. But just these are 3 different places where there's important decisions being made about what's happening to young people in the county, and they're all public meetings that you can go to and make public comment related to the charge of that committee. In terms of the money that Santa Cruz County is getting. And again, the Youth Offender Block Grant money, we've talked about how, the JJRBG, we've talked about how we think that should have actually been more based on the numbers of young people we think are going through the system. This is just a recent snapshot of some of the funds that are coming to Santa Cruz for a few different pots of money. The JJRBG, that JJCPA that I just talked about, crime prevention, juvenile reentry grants, youth offender block grants, and data. And let me tell you what each of those is, and I can toggle back here. But here's a brief description of what each of those things are. We've talked a lot about the JJRBG. That's money for for counties to figure out care of young people who were otherwise subject to DJJ. The JJCPA I just sort of went over, and that is money to implement programs that will sort of prevent a young person from going into the system. And again, both of those are, there's a plan developed for those pots of money. The one for the JJCC subcommittee and the other by the JJCC. And then there's a couple other pots of money. The Youth Offender Block Grant, that's money that comes to the state based on a formula of the number of young people who had a disposition for a felony offense, any felony offense. And this happened in 2007. We had the sort of first round of realignment, and we limited the number of young people who could be committed to DJJ. Used to be that you could be committed to DJJ for any felony offense. In 2007, that changed, and it changed to have to be a serious offense that's listed in that code section that I've been referencing, 707B. And so that's another pot of money. That money does not have a body that meets to investigate how it's being spent, but it's still a pot of money that comes to the county to investigate what are we doing with that. The intent of it is to be serving our young people who were realigned to the counties during that first round. And so what are we doing with that money? Then there's another pot of money called the Juvenile Reentry Grant. And that's money that's supposed to provide local supervision for young people who were discharged from DJJ, for quote unquote youthful offenders discharged from DJJ. And it's based on the any youth who's discharged and any youth who's discharged and incarcerated. So again, it's one of these weird formulas that actually give you more money if you're locking young people up. So worth investigating sort of what's happening with Santa Cruz there. And then there's this little bitty bit of money that comes from the data that has to be collected with realignment. But here's this is just a little snapshot of what each of those, how much money Santa Cruz has received from each of those pots in the last few years. I was going to go through a whole thing about the JJRBG, but I'm looking at the time and it's 7:15. And I don't know that we have enough time to do that. Edgar, should we put a pause on it and go straight to the Santa Cruz proposal? Or do you want to?
I think we go straight to the Santa Cruz proposal. Yep. And just again, everyone, please drop, if you have questions that are coming up, drop them. This is being recorded, so not you'll get it, you'll get the recording. However, we also want more questions in case you have any lurking concerns, you want some clarity, we can always loop back around and provide that clarity.
Great. So, and I'll just say, big shout out to Carlos and many others throughout the state who've been working on revisions to how we decide how much money goes to the JJRBG. I'm just going to say real quickly that we have developed a number of pretty, I think, great proposals that we have given to the state about what we want and don't want for how we decide where money goes and who gets more money. So, if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out and we can talk more about it. Okay, so the Santa Cruz probation proposal. You can see here, this is what was listed in the Santa Cruz ordinance that we have all been sort of scratching our heads about. It says, whereas the current juvenile hall has 2 separate housing units with a total capacity of 40 youth, and probation wishes to designate 1 unit for the use of Redwoods Coastal Academy and allocate approximately up to 10 beds for youth in a secure youth treatment facility program and up to 5 beds for ranch camp commitments with space for expansion when necessary and appropriate. And then, sort of big question mark about where this came from and what community input was there. And then also, where did the numbers come from? Because if we think about the number of young people who were at DJJ from Santa Cruz County, it hasn't reached 10 in many years. And so just sort of reminding us, asking probing questions about what does this proposal mean? How was it developed? Why was it developed? What are some of the reasons why parts of it might be something we'd want to see? What are reasons why we would want to fight so hard against implementation of most of it? And one thing I'll put out there, and then I'm going to open it up for folks to just dialogue and ask questions, but also dialogue about it, is that I think probably all of you know that right now, when Santa Cruz County has not established a secure youth treatment facility. So when they deem a young person that needs to be incarcerated, as a result of what they've, the crime that they've committed and the judge has found true, they're being sent to Sonoma County's secure youth treatment facility. It's really far away. If the whole point of realignment was that young people were going to be close to home, we have lost it with that. So part of the justification that we've heard is, well, we want young people to be closer to home. The thing that we all know, though, is that there's lots of things that we can do with a young person who's been accused of a serious offense, and Santa Cruz has a very long history of this, who's been accused of a serious offense that do not include incarceration. So the part about the ranch camp seems like totally ridiculous. I don't understand that part at all. But the part about security of treatment facilities, I can understand sort of an idea about why that would be a proposal on the table. But I personally think it's a terrible idea because it sort of is counter to all of what Santa Cruz County, theoretically, the probation department has stood for in terms of its acknowledgement around the harms, the deep, deep, deep harms of incarceration. Okay, so I'll stop there, and I guess maybe I'll even stop sharing my screen, so we can just start having a little bit more dialogue about the proposal, about some of the different committees, and where where we think there could be points of advocacy here.
I just want to say thank you, Laura, once again for providing us all that information. That was a lot, and you
It was a
rifled
lot.
right through it. You rifled right through it. I'm always in the process of learning, so I'm hoping each and every one of y'all joining the call today really got some good points, got some clarity. Again, if there is questions, drop it in the chat box. We can answer. But to offer a little bit of context, as of October 8th, the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors has given granted the Santa Cruz probation the secure youth track. It was submitted to the Board of State and Community Corrections August 1st officially. October 8th, the Santa Cruz County probation has the ability to establish a SYTF. They're in the process of developing that. And so that's up in the air as far as what it's going to look like, right? I know that the county probation has hosted a community forum only around what a camp is, not necessarily around what should our SYTF look like. Process B, who should be a part of that, still not out there. So I just want to offer that little bit of context to everyone. And I think for us as an organization, as MILPA, we believe in this idea of keeping young people close to home. That's off top. We just do not believe that this whole idea of having a camp inside the juvenile hall is the best thing. We have an abundance of services and resources throughout the county. That is one big thing for that we do know. However, we want the county probation to be more creative, use your imagination, and also collaborate and with resources, specifically with resources, and actually creating a less restrictive program that really embodies the values that they uphold and the values of the community. So I just wanted to offer that little bit of context, but I throw it in the middle. I know there's questions, there's thoughts.